Welcome to another installment of the Badass Entrepreneurs Club. Today, we have the amazing Stephanie Gunther from Wax Creek, who is someone who I've worked with quite a bit on brand archetyping. Now, brand archetyping is something that people don't necessarily know a lot about, but she is doing some amazing work on this to help people to really discover their brands. So today, we're going to be talking about her entrepreneurial journey. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
My pleasure. So let's dig a little bit into your history. How did you step into the world of entrepreneurship?
Well, let's see here. I feel like this is such a loaded question. It's like, how far do you want me to go back? But really, I used to do sales and marketing for some construction companies. And at some point I was traveling a lot and I had a 5-year-old at home and I just didn't want to travel anymore. And so I thought in my mind, like, I'm just going to start a business and it'll be amazing and so easy. And like, I know all these things and I can, I had enough experience in a lot of different types of marketing that it just seemed so simple to me in my mind. And it wasn't. Turns out it's not that easy. And so that was about 5.5 years ago. And so really through my own journey of stumbling around in my own business. And I have one short story I can tell you I think that everybody can relate to this because I think everybody has this turning point or this line that's like, I'm not doing this anymore this way. And so I worked with this client that I found on Thumbtack, and that's horrible. Like, don't use Thumbtack to try to find leads. I don't think that that's a good way. And so I paid like $30 for the lead and I went and met her for coffee, like far away. So I was already like in for like $50, right? Like after coffee and a lead and driving and gas. Yeah. And she just needed the most simple thing, just a logo, just the file that she could use. All she had was an art file and she needed like a JPEG file or something more user-friendly. And I thought, well, this is so easy. I can't charge her very much for this. And so I did, and I charged her a very minimal amount. And then it turned into this nightmare. And the files weren't actually accurate. So I had to recreate the art. And I was like, it's still fine. Like, I guess I'm just going to be charitable today. And here I am helping this lady out. And then I went on a camping trip and I was trying to finish it up. And I was like camping and missing my entire trip because I was driving into town to try to send this file to her, and finally got it sent. And then she sent me back this like 4-paragraph email about how horrible of a person I was and how I was trying to take her money, like the $50 I charged her. And I just thought, like, I ruined my whole camping trip with my family, and I can't do this anymore, and I'm not going to do this anymore. And that was the moment of reckoning, like, this isn't easy. Mm-hmm. And I think I need some help. And so really through that is how I got into the discovery of branding, was through my own branding and really dialing in who I wanted to work with and who I didn't want to work with. And so it was through that process that I just discovered this love and this passion for branding. And that's pretty much the story. That's how it started.
Mm-hmm. So before you had this moment, what were you trying to do? Were you trying to like bend over backwards for everyone just to get the business, or what was your approach that you realized you had to change?
Definitely. So when I was a marketing manager, I kind of had my hands on lots of different things. So I understood enough about almost everything to be dangerous. So, I was a graphic designer and I could build websites, and I knew a little bit about SEO and a little bit about social media and a little bit about all the things. And so in my mind, I was just going to be offer outsourced marketing to people, to small mm-hmm. businesses. And turns out, if you're for everybody, you're for nobody. What they say is true. And that really is true. And so I was trying to be too many things to too many people, just completely underselling myself, not spending time becoming an expert at something, at one thing or a couple of things. I was trying to be an expert at 20 things. And it was a real bad idea.
Yeah. And that's such a tempting thing, especially as an entrepreneur, is like, you get these ideas, you're visionary, and you're like, oh, someone asks you for that. You're like, of course I can do that, or I can figure it out. Right. And then we end up having all these offerings that don't really make sense to what we're happy about. And then you reach that point where you're just like, no, enough is enough. let's take all this experimenting we've done and let's simplify it down to what you actually want to do.
Yes.
And when you were trying to figure out what that thing that was that you wanted to do, how did you start like peeling away those extra things that you were offering to figure out that this is what I really need to specialize in?
You know, what's funny about that is I really thought it was going to be graphic design, which we do now. Today we do some graphic design. Obviously, we do logos, but it was through the process of doing my own branding and going through the process that I realized like just how important it was and how lacking it was for small business owners. And really that there's not a lot of great options or solutions for people like me who, you know, was just an entrepreneur starting out, and I couldn't get my hands on the right kind of data to really help me understand it and digest it. Because when you hear or when you read or research branding, you hear a lot about Nike and Starbucks and Disney and all of these big, huge brands, which I couldn't relate to because I was so small and they're so mega huge. I just couldn't, I digest the information in a way that made sense to me. And so that was really how that began. Just that realization that small business owners need this. Like everybody needs to know who they are. And, you know, a lot of times for small business owners, that turns into some sort of therapy because it's also just the permission to be who you are. And that is going to be partly what I talk about today, because it's so true. And we're trying to fit ourselves into this little box. And I know you talk about this all the time about being authentic. And I mean, I see that constantly from you. And I appreciate that work so much because it's important work. And we're just all trying, especially in the beginning when we're scared and we don't know what we're doing. We're literally trying to be like everybody else, which is the worst thing you can do for your business. So
100%. I remember like one of the advices, I don't think I've told you this story, but one of the advices I got when I first started out with my business coaching company was that I needed to blend in before I stood out. So I needed to be like everyone else out there before I could actually like let my hair be the way I was, be the sassy version of myself that I actually am. And it was so detrimental because I was just vanilla and blending in with everyone else. And once I stood forward and was like, okay, this is who I am. If you like me, great. If you don't like me, then don't work with me. But allowing myself to be that authentic person was really important. And a lot of times when I'm talking to clients, like I had a conversation with a client recently, and she was like, oh my gosh, I am comparing myself to this big company and I'm competing with them now on social media. And like, I don't have the budget that they do. I don't have the employees behind me that they do. And how am I ever going to stand out? And, you know, this is where branding really comes into play, right? Because we want to make sure that you are who you are, because you are going to attract the right people because of who you are. Yes, a bit of extra money can help to get things pushed forward faster, but in the end, it really comes down to that essence, which is what I think you really pull out of people when you're doing your work.
Yes, for sure. We certainly try. And there's a lot of different ways to assess the value of a company, or what the values are and what the characteristics are and what the brand is itself. And that's one reason we use archetypes, really, is because when you think about it, going back to this theory that we're all trying to blend in, which is not a good theory. But when you think about it, this is ancient, like storytelling and the way that we process information. This isn't a new concept, and it's right now it's all the rage in marketing is storytelling, but it's really been around. I mean, the brand archetypes are from the early 1900s, and they go back to, I mean, we start talking about like Greek mythology and some really, really ancient cultures telling stories and using that as a way to share information and pass it down through generations. And that's really what we're trying to do. And there's a lot of research. I'm just starting to dig into this, but there's obviously, we've heard the stats that most consumers make decisions unconsciously or using their subconscious mind 95% of the time, which is mind blowing to think about. Like, we're all trying so hard to be like, but look at me, like, I'm shiny and pick me. And really people are just like, this one just feels good. I don't know. You're like, well, why'd you buy it? I don't know. I just liked it. So it's really important to understand how this methodology is so ingrained in who we are as humans. And there's a lot of, back to what I was saying, is this research I've just started to do is there's really a lot of proof that this is a part of how our brains work, that we're born with this, that like a part of our DNA is this storytelling and these characteristics. And sometimes you see babies be born, or if you've had children, they're like 2 weeks old and you can already start to sense what the personality or the characteristics are for that person. And that's amazing, really, because it's always like, well, it's just environmental and there's all these influences and all these things, but really we're just sort of born with it. And businesses have the same thing because they're run by people. And so we have to really appreciate that and identify those things.
Do you find with brand, oops, sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
So do you find, like, you've been in the business for a while, do you see the new generation coming up interacting differently with brands than, say, our generation and older? Because we've got the millennials, they're seeking happiness, they're seeking, passion and content in their life, and not just like chasing the dollar bill like our generation and above has been. Has branding been influenced severely by that?
I would say that it's becoming even more critical. And part of the reason for that is, we're going to use archetypes to identify some of those things. But the biggest thing that I would see, or the biggest shift, is what are the values of the business? It's so important to the younger generations. They want to know, historically, we've been telling people, don't pick a side. Don't say anything politically unless you really are going to go for it. You really don't need to share your religious views. You don't need to share a lot of things because you can really hurt yourself if you aren't super careful, or like working with a PR firm to do that properly. But now, the new generations want to know, they want to know all of that. What do you stand for? What are you doing to make the world a better place? How do you treat your employees? What is the values in the business? How is it running? So, and that's something that, of course, branding does address. And we're really looking at that. And it also helps to pull out the why in the business. The people that are looking for passion-driven lives are also looking to work with other people and other companies that do the same. And so being able to articulate that you love what you're doing, and you're not just, they're just trying to make a living is critically important now. So sometimes clients are like, well, I don't know. This is just my job and I'm just trying to make a living. And it's like, well, we need to keep digging deeper then, let's keep going, because we have to be able to tell people why they should shop with you, because it is so important now more than ever.
Mm-hmm. And as entrepreneurs, like if you're in the entrepreneurial realm, there has to be a reason why you stepped into that, because it's so much easier to just go and work for someone else, right? The journey, like you realized it not too far into the entrepreneurship thing, that this is not the path of least resistance. There's a lot of resistance if you're doing this, and you have to have something in your belly that like gives you fire to actually move forward with this and keep fighting the good fight to get to the point of profitability.
Yeah, for sure. And it's important to articulate it. And what's even more important is that a lot of entrepreneurs, this is where I don't know if it's probably just some sort of insecurity, right? Imposter syndrome, whatever it is that a lot of business owners deal with, especially in the beginning, they don't feel comfortable sharing their own story. They don't feel comfortable sharing their personal values. And that's why, when branding comes in, we have to look at the human running the company, because there's going to be a lot of similarities, but creating a separate brand, one, it gives you permission to, to feed something that doesn't feel like you're constantly just me. Like, I feel this way. I want it to be like this because I just think that. And it kind of gives it some separation. Yet at the same time, it's giving that business owner permission to really be who they are and share that story and share the passion. Because so often, especially with women entrepreneurs, I see this really more than I wish I did, is this like, well, I don't want to be too splashy. I don't want to share my story. If I'm passionate, then I'm loud and too much sometimes. And so I really think that it's important to stop that and live truly. We should all be living in passion, but if you're running a business, hopefully you're doing it in passion also, and sharing it with the world. It's, passion and positivity and optimism are so contagious. And I just think that the world needs more of that. And so I swear, that's a third of my job is business therapist. Like, let's talk about it. And then I'm going to have to spend 2 hours giving you permission to embrace it, to own it. This is who you are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's fear of coming across narcissistically with the brand when you're stepping into social media. There's this fear because we've seen people before us do things narcissistically. But I think a lot of those people who are afraid to showcase who they are. Like they don't even have a hope of becoming narcissistic in the way that they present themselves. They have nothing to worry about, but there's that fear that they're going to become like the Kim Kardashian of their their industry. And those people, like I think if they can think about serving their clients through their marketing, through their branding, and allow themselves to like use it as a continuation of the services or the products that they deliver directly to the clients, I think that can help them to become a lot more comfortable, because then they're like, oh, this is about serving. This isn't about me. It's actually about doing a better job for our clients in between when we actually have those touch points with them.
For sure. It's, it starts to bridge the gap between like the work-life balance problem, right? I mean, when you're working with clients that you love and you're adding value to them and you're being yourself and it's not a show, it's not an act that you're putting on, and you just get to share whatever genius things are in your brain and help people and add value in their lives. Like then the work-life balance kind of becomes a little more obsolete, because you're just moving closer to your passion and to living in purpose. And so it's not this like seesaw, because it doesn't have to be one or the other. When you're doing good work and working with clients you love, like they're kind of all in the middle together, and you have to have some separation, of course, and family time and time for yourself, time at work, but it all feels pretty good. And so I think that is huge. And it's, I think back to your point of the fear of becoming narcissistic, my PSA would be, if you're concerned that you're going to become narcissistic, you definitely aren't going to. Like just that fact alone, the fact that you're thinking about it, you don't have to worry. Just be conscious about it and you'll be fine.
I think you're absolutely right with that. Now, on your journey, I want to dig into that a little bit more. At what point did you feel like you were living in your passion? This was no longer work. This was living out your purpose.
Okay, I'm so glad you asked this. I honestly, it was when I started doing archetyping. There's a lot of companies that do branding in a lot of different ways, and really adding in archetyping was that for me. Also, though, with that, I had to really get comfortable with it, because I, just like everybody else, was like, oh gosh, I'm going out on a limb here. What are people going to think about me? Is this crazy? And I had to spend some time thinking about that and getting comfortable. But really, I've always been just obsessed really with like personal growth and development and becoming better and learning more and understanding what, just why people do the things they do and how we are operating and how we interact with each other. And so I always am, I love like every kind of personality test you could give me, I will take, and with joy. I love it. So using archetyping and there actually being a system to like create, have this assessment and really be able to dig into these businesses and understand, the characteristics and the personality traits, and assigning that to people is pure bliss for me, really. I love that work. And so while it was one of the scarier things I did in my business, it was also the best thing I did in my business.
Mm-hmm. Well, and do you find that the businesses that you work with, if they are a bit jack of all trades or Jane of all trades compared to the ones that are niched, which ones do you see are succeeding the most?
The ones that are niched, of course. It's so much easier to assign, I think there's really three elements. Is you need to have a very clear message and stance and offerings, a niche. You have to have that in order to have a really successful brand. You also have to not micromanage your own brand. You need to really let other people come in and take a look at it. That's, that always sounds like a plug, for people like you and I, when I say that, but it's so critical. We're so bad at our own things. It's so hard to see things objectively when we're on the inside, and having an expert come in and say, no, this makes a lot of sense and this is perfect for you, is really hard, because a lot of people still, I think that everybody knows that branding, there's a really famous quote, and it's that branding isn't what you say it is, it's what they say it is. But it's still really hard for entrepreneurs and business owners to split that up. It's like, no, this is my baby. I am going to have control of this, and you're not going to tell me to take this crazy right turn here. But that's what you have to do. So you have to find somebody that you can trust to work with, to give you that insight. so that you can really go that direction, because having the niche and having the trust and having the passion is really all you need to create an amazing brand that people love and they remember. That's the point.
For sure. And I think inviting someone in to take a look at what you're doing, that's super vulnerable, right? Because we're like, oh, what if they find the dirt that I've swept under the carpet that I didn't even realize I swept under the carpet? And now you're like, oh, rose-colored glasses have been shattered and now I have to fix all this stuff. But it is super important to have people come in and advise, because we can only see so much because we know what we know. And if you have someone come in from the outside, they're going to be a bit more objective. They bring in a totally different ball of knowledge that they can actually use to influence your business and help you to take it to the next level, because we only can get to a certain level of complexity within ourselves, and then we need to add some ingredients from the outside in order to be able to grow. And self-study only goes so far, but having that outside person take a look, I think is really important. How often would you recommend that someone come in and take a look at their brand?
You know what? That's kind of a tough question. You definitely want to build a brand, and hopefully you're a part of a process when you're building your brand that is something that is sustainable. So you don't have to keep changing. It's definitely not something that like every year you should be like, who are we this year? Because that's not good for your business either. But really, I would say probably at the very least, every 3 to 4 years is probably about right. When we see most often with newer businesses, people either want to do some branding right up front because they understand the importance of it and they need an identity because they're just lost there, which in most people are, because it's really hard. But then we really see them go this gap between years 1 and 7 or 8, where they just build and they start to become successful and they start to find some rhythm. They know who they want to work with. They start putting the pieces together. And then at about year 7 or 8 is where it's like, okay, we have some money now, we have a budget for this. We're going to spend some of that this year looking at, making sure that everything's cohesive. Can this brand support the scale and the growth that we're trying to achieve? And what do we need to do and adjust to really get to that next level? So it's really common to see people at the very beginning and then not see them again until year 7 or 8, which I'm not sure if that's right or wrong, but that's pretty typical from our stance on how we meet up with people. And I haven't been in business long enough to see if the new ones come back at year 8. So that's the bucket. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and I think in those formative years, those startup years, you have to be doing so much experimenting, because you may have this great idea and then you take it to the marketplace and they have a completely different opinion of what you're doing and whether it's worthwhile and whether they want to value it and pay for it and all that. And what you mentioned was, your brand is what people say it is, not what you say it is. And it takes a while to get that input. And I always recommend survey your people. If you don't know what your brand is about, send out a survey and you'd be shocked at how many people will respond, because people love to look at things and criticize and offer their input. And I don't say criticize in a negative way. If they like what you're doing, they want to help you to be successful. And it can be super vulnerable to say to your clients, what do you think I'm doing? What am I doing well? What am I not doing well? And what would you like different from me? Because then sometimes you have to, again, those rose-colored glasses get shattered and you have to look at things a lot, very introspectively, to be able to elevate and get to the next level, whether you're bringing in an outside person or just seeking it out from your clients.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice. I think every company should survey their clients. Even if you're really small, you should be surveying your clients at least once a year to understand where you're missing the mark and where you're doing really well and what they would like to see, and maybe even additional services that you haven't thought of or different products. It's so useful, but you're right. It does require a lot of vulnerability. And again, though, that's very supportive in a good brand, is being able to show some vulnerability and being real and not pretending like, what you're always doing. I mean, and it's not that we don't know what you're doing, but just being open to feedback and willing to make those changes to be better is really impressive to clients. We're all human, so we understand that nothing's perfect. And if it is, it's probably just sort of a facade, because there's just always things happening in the background, and we all know that. It's just sometimes easier or harder to see. But I think being able to be on the offense with vulnerability is better than waiting for something to hit you, and blindside you that you didn't know was coming. from a past client or something, a bad review or things like that. I always think it's better to be offensive. So, but it is a tough one.
Mm-hmm. But I think when you can step off that pedestal, and trust me, your clients have you on a pedestal. They're not coming to you because they think you're at the same level. Human-wise, you might be at the same level, but you have an expertise that has you on that pedestal. You asking for help and being willing to be like, I don't know everything. I'm having an imperfect moment. I'm having a human moment. That's going to elevate you even farther up in their brain than just trying to keep this perfect corporate front where, you know, you're not relatable, you're not really all that likable because you're this stale, stagnant thing. Whereas when you're being human, you're dynamic and you have this energy flow, you have people wanting to engage with you because you are actually a good human being, and having that vulnerable moment of asking for that insight, it's going to endear people to your brand, not push it away.
For sure. I totally agree with that. I've noticed over the last year, especially through the pandemic, that there's been a lot of companies that have taken some giant missteps. And just with all of the political things happening, especially in the States last year, there was just some huge missteps that were shocking. And some of those companies didn't say anything about it. They're just trying to sweep it under the rug. And you're like, everybody knows about that. I don't think you can sweep it under the rug, but they're just trying, and it's really going to reflect poorly, and you'll see those companies suffer, and maybe they can make a comeback, but maybe not. I mean, sometimes that's the beginning of the end when that happens. And so I think it is very important to just be real about it, because everybody makes mistakes, every company makes mistakes, and sometimes we just have to own it and fix it and say, like, we hear it, we're going to do something about this, and then move on. And everybody's like, okay, that's great. But it's amazing to watch those big companies struggle in that zone as well. So it's not just the smaller companies that are having issues like that.
Yeah. And I think when you don't address the elephant in the room, like if you're having an interaction with the client, you're like, I wonder if they saw what I did, and you don't actually speak about it, then they're uncomfortable because they're like, are you going to bring it up? And you're uncomfortable because you're like, did they see it? And so you have this exchange that can be the detriment to your relationship, instead of being like, yeah, we effed up and this is who we are, and this is what happened, and this is what we're going to do about it. And just being, again, stepping off the pedestal of perfection and just being a good human being and being like, you know what, we had a brain fart, we did something bad, and this is what we're going to do about it. And yeah, you might lose some clients over it, but you're also going to have people who go, okay, good on you for actually addressing it and trying to make amends. And maybe I'll forgive you, maybe I won't, but there's respect for actually opening your heart and being like, Kate, this is what I did. I'm sorry. I hope I can make it up to you, right?
Yes, for sure. And that's, just tying that back to archetyping, when you understand the characteristics of your brand. So just to give the listeners an example here, because I know that this can sound like a foreign language sometimes, but three of the archetypes are caregiver, you have an outlaw, and then maybe you have the magician. And so how each of those people, if they were actual characters, they would respond to that differently, right? But you get to do it in your own way, and you get to use your own voice. And so if you're the caregiver, it's, that's your brand archetype, then you're saying things like in a very soft and genuine way, but it's like, hey, we know we messed up, or we had this misstep here, but we really do care about you, or we care about this cause. And so here's what we're going to do to fix it. And it gives you that direction instead of just not being sure what to do or what to say. It gives you those personality traits. Like how would the outlaw say this, because they sometimes don't even really care, but if it's a big enough misstep, you still have to own it, but you can still do it in a sort of a sassy way maybe. And so if that's the brand, there's just lots of different ways to approach it. And that's what I love so much about for companies to be able to fall back on that and really like internalize that. And it's, I know it can seem a little elementary sometimes, especially, we start talking about these characters and people are like, I don't even have a clue what this is. And it doesn't sometimes feel always, I don't want to say it doesn't always feel professional, because it feels like we're playing with cartoons sometimes in some ways, but it's really serious business. And it's what the huge companies use to stand out and to create that identity that people can relate to. So it's really important. And not just important for everybody else, but it's so important for the business owner to be able to funnel it through that and say, how do I respond using my personality traits and the voice I know I have? How do I respond to these things? And usually it's pretty easy if you have that much insight into it, then it's pretty easy to calculate a proper response.
Mm-hmm. And I think if you know who you are and you know who you attract, then it allows you to sift through, maybe I should have this sales conversation or maybe I shouldn't. I know this person is totally not within the buyer persona that I would normally work with. So, time is precious. Why would I work with them if they're not going to be a good fit for who I stand, what I am and what I stand for? And I think, we did our brand archetyping session for our company with you, and it really opened up the team's mind to what we really stood for. Like, they had a pretty good understanding, but they walked away with this in-depth understanding, with a change of language, with a change of perception of how we interact with the world as a company. And it was such a beautiful thing because, it was so enlightening for them. And there was all these light bulb moments that were going off, which you witnessed and I witnessed within the group. And it's definitely something that when you understand what you stand for to that level, then it allows you to move lightning speed forward with trying to build your company and your brand.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. We had so many aha moments in your session, and it was there's subtle shifts. It wasn't like you went from over here to this side completely different. It was just very subtle changes, and that's what we live for. I love those aha moments. That's my favorite part of the job, and we usually we know almost to a science now, when we're going to hit that stride in the session. And up until that, it's a lot of digging and a lot of talking and a lot of, getting everything out on the table. And then it becomes pretty clear. And it's so useful when you are trying to figure out anything in your business on how to proceed forward or what to do or what content to write or, what you say to clients at certain parts in the sales cycle. It hopefully helps a lot with that, just understanding what they need to hear and what you're supposed to be saying, and it matches up really well.
Absolutely. So if there's an entrepreneur out there who is really struggling to figure out what they stand for, what their brand is about, what would be some of the questions you'd recommend they ask themselves to start understanding and getting out of the forest and actually starting to see the trees around them and what they stand for?
I would really recommend the first piece that you need to understand is who your buyers are. And so you need to think about not just listing off everybody on earth, right? The best way to do that is to really actually list out who your clients are and then from there figure out the clients you actually really enjoyed working with, even if that's only one. If you've had 30 clients and you only loved one, start with that one client and work from there. Because that is the biggest mistake. And everybody thinks that when they start niching that tight and they start cutting people out, that those people just are no longer for them and they'll never come to them. And what if somebody approaches me and they don't fit this niche that I've created? And that's the brilliant part about niching that nobody believes. It's like a giant leap of faith. But when you start niching, people from all over the place outside of that start getting attracted to that for whatever reason. A good example of that is a close friend and colleague of mine is a business coach for women. And once she really went public with that and started saying that very assertively, she had more male clients than ever before. So I don't even know why it works that way, but that is really how it happens. And so the tighter you can make that niche, I think the theory is that people then assume that you're so expertise and you're so zoned in that it proves that experience, that you've been in business long enough to really figure that out. And then it makes you look more attractive or more impressive. And so niching is critically important. Although it feels bad, it's so important. The next thing is I would really recommend you can take an archetype quiz, which you can do on our website at waxcreek.com, or you can find any archetyping quiz online because there's a ton of different resources. And figure out what your brand archetype is. I know it seems like that's not something important to do right this second, but it really is. If you know that your brand is a certain type, like a caregiver, then you know how to start building up your content. You know what kind of voice to use. It's pretty easy. If you're a caregiver, you're nurturing and you're caring and you're soft and you're warm and you probably don't cuss. and you take care of people, you take care of your clients. And so just having that baseline, like you can go all in on those types of things. So I would definitely recommend that. And then the last thing is I would recommend that everybody listen to Simon Sinek's, I think it was a TED Talk about finding your why. It's like 20 minutes long. And he talks about, we all are out here in this zone. My hands are weird with my background, about like what you do, right? Like how you do it. We talk so much about that, but really the core of that is, why do you do it? You have to figure out why you're doing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And whether that's that you donate a percentage of your sales to a nonprofit that is near and dear to your heart, or you just have a passion for helping your clientele, you have to find that why, and you have to use that, because it's at the center of all of the other things. And it's really more important than how you do it or what you're doing, because that's like sitting in a class, right? Like, it's just like, nobody's listening to that. People will listen to your why. They're inspiring. You're telling a story, and that's what people really want to engage with. And that they learn a lot about you that way. So those would be the 3 things I would start with.
Perfect. I think that's great advice. Now, if anyone wants to get into understanding what their brand archetype is, their buyer personas, even the language that they need to use in their business, how can they get a hold of you, Stephanie?
Probably the easiest way would be to follow us on social media, which is we are at Wax Creek, or you can go to our website, which is waxcreek.com. That's probably the easiest, is just to send us a message on any of those platforms, and we'll be in touch. And we do have some really great options for big businesses and for small businesses. Even if you just have a few people on your team, we've got some great packages too, because I never want to leave those people in the dust. I never want to build my business to a place where it doesn't support small business owners, because that is my why. So we have to make sure we keep those guys in a place where they can also get some help and support if they need it.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate your time and sharing your insight with us and digging a little bit deeper into what happened in your entrepreneurial journey. So thank you for your time again, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me. You're wonderful, and I love working with you. So thanks for having me here today.
My pleasure. Have a beautiful day.
You too.